Well, hi everyone, and welcome to this week's edition of Feeling Smarter. As always, I'm joined by Tim Miller. Tim, g'day, how are you?
Aaron, going well, thank you very much. And yourself?
Not too bad. We've had quite a busy day. We held our State of SMSF's 2024 webinar to nearly 900 registrations. So it was great to see the level of interest in terms of what's happening in the SMSF sector. And we thought we'd mix it up a little bit today. So rather than talking specifically to a topic, we had a number of questions come from the attendees, and we thought we'd come back and put a little bit more meat on the bone in respect to some of these topics. And the number one topic, and this was not only in the survey, but got a bit of airplay today, of course, Tim, was our Division 296 tax that is being proposed. And we had a number of questions here, and maybe we'll try and bring them all in together. But the first one, I guess, that stands out is just the distinction around how the tax is going to work versus a per member basis versus what might happen in the fund, and therefore this concept of double taxation.
Yeah, so look, it's certainly a recurring theme, and as we talked about, 2/3 of attendees rated it as the number one ticket item for the 2024 year, and so to tick off a couple of questions that were raised throughout the presentation. One of the first ones raised was the implementation date, and of course, the expected implementation date is the 1st of July 2025, with the first lot of assessments going out in the 26 year, because it'll be based on opening balance 1 July 25 or 30 June 25, and then closing 30 June 26. But yeah, the next key point is that this is an individual based tax. So whilst we're using superannuation funds as the guide, and total superannuation balance, it will be done on a per member basis. So by per member, it actually means per individual. So it's looking at them across the entirety of their superannuation history, and well, not history, that's not the right word, but all of the super entities, to determine what their earnings are if their total balance is above that $3 million.
Yeah, and I think I mentioned in the webinar, it looks and smells very similar to the operation of Division 293, which of course is a tax on an additional contributions tax for high income earners. So it in essence falls into that same sort of category, is the best way to describe it, insofar that, as you said, you get the tax leveled at the individual, but with a release mechanism if you want to have that taken from the superannuation interest or interests of that individual. But the other thing that obviously come about was the fact that do we end up in this double taxation situation, because we've got this tax on the unrealized gain that is happening year on year on year, but then we have a CGT event that will occur in the year that the asset is disposed as well.
Yeah, and I think this is where the industry argument really stems from, and that is that we should actually be basing this on actual earnings, and unrealized gains aren't actual earnings. It's only the realized position that the fund ultimately pays tax on. So we're, in the end, we're burdening, and I choose to use that word, that we're burdening the individual with a paper-based growth event. So with something that hasn't necessarily occurred, we're saying, well, you have to pay tax on that fact. And so, loath to use the term double taxation, because that would imply that it's that you individually are being taxed twice on the event, but two of your entities are, being yourself as an individual, and then eventually the fund in the CGT environment, and that is problematic.
And the challenge here at the moment is the fact that we don't have any resolution on this matter. We won't get any resolution at least until close to mid-year. And therefore, the behaviours of, well, should we be transferring assets? What changes should we be making? Well, yes, the time is kind of running out, because we might want to take some action over multiple years, but you don't want to be pulling the trigger before we really have some sort of definity. And I think, moving on to our next topic here, the phase 3 tax cuts is a perfect case in point. We've had a government that has been very clear in their views that they weren't going to change, they weren't going to change, they weren't going to change. and now they've actually changed them. And so you just need to be careful here about how quickly you do stuff. And yes, your clients might be impatient about, well, what do we do? And I'm going to move assets out. You can do all the planning. I think that's the discussions that need to be happening now, but you don't want to be executing on this because at the 11th hour, things could change and change very dramatically because that's how Parliament works.
Yeah, and I think you're spot on, because that was one of the fear, I guess, fear type questions that were raised, and not directly from a fear point of view, but was that people are looking to sell down on their big bulky property style assets now, and again, that's to an extent. We appreciate that property sales don't happen overnight, and so they do need a fair bit of planning. But you also don't want to be jumping at shadows and selling a property now and then having the taxation element change so that it's not on unrealized gains and have the impact of not having that asset in the super environment.
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
And there are a number of strategies that people will look to employ, and there was some comments around that. So something like deferred tax reporting is certainly an element that's going to be there because of the concept of total superannuation balance. And when we look at that definition, it talks about the fact that it's a cessation or termination value at that point in time. So yeah, there'll be a range of strategies that can look to be employed.
yeah. Sorry, and I was just going to say, Aaron, that sort of led to one of the other questions, which was the interplay between Div 296 and NALI. And I think in the same sort of breath, you sort of highlight, say, well, NALI is again a taxation position of the fund versus the individual. But what is ironically interesting is that if there is a specific fund expense and it's a significant asset of the fund, and the fund is they're subsequently taxed at 45% on that. Well, you may end up in a situation where you're no longer liable for Div 296 because you've lost a chunk of the fund to taxation. And similarly, with one of the other measures that we raised today, which is this outstanding issue of SMSF residency. SMSF residency can potentially lead to an SMSF being defined as non-complying, and you can lose half your fund or 45% of your fund just by failing that residency test. So it's all interlinked.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, on the topic of NALI, we obviously had a few questions down that front, and most commonly, I think, that came out of the questions was just the way in which many of the audience, being professionals, would look to charge for services. And ultimately here, there was questions about the opportunity for relief of having to charge fees and so forth. Maybe get you to comment a little bit about, again, what people need to be conscious of now that this legislation looks like it's going to get resolved in the early part of this 2024 year, and therefore the steps that need to apply given that the safe harbour from the ATO ceased at 30th of June last year.
Yeah, I think there's two clear areas to be conscious of, and the first one is sort of staffing policies. So obviously a lot of attendees at today's session would have been accounting practices, advice practices, where they'd have staff with self-managed superannuation funds, and the key to that is consistency. So the key there is having, if you're going to have a discounting policy, that discounting policy applies to all staff. So, the ATO have been relatively clear on that since about a third of the way through the consultation period. Yep. With regards to staffing prices. And then I think the second one is coming back to the point that you made today about identifying whether or not you are undertaking the work in your role as a trustee or in your role as a professional. So that whole 17B of the SISAC part with the remuneration. So if you are charging that work to the public and you're doing it on commercial terms and all that, well, you've got to do that for SIS purposes. And so if you're then doing it to your self-managed super fund, make sure it's on an arm's length basis. But if you've got the skills to perform those duties in your capacity as trustee, then and there is some insignificant use of, say, work computers after hours or whatever it might be, then that's not necessarily going to be a problem. We've seen that with a few of the interpretive decisions that the ATO have released over the last sort of 6 months, where people have come out and asked that question of them.
Yeah, and I guess finally, as we wrap up, the other areas that we've had questions on and we gave a lot of insight into was um, not only the changes to I guess, the government's view around the tax cuts, but the focus, I guess, ultimately was this drop in the lowest, I guess, in the first marginal rate that applies, and the closer relationship it now has to the tax rate that is applicable to self-managed super funds. And I guess, Tim, in that regard, we just noted the fact that it might open up this whole gambit of, where is money going to be held? And I think I touched on it throughout the webinar, the fact that we have so much going on in the member versus death benefit issue that potentially that's just one reason why we might see a greater sort of distribution into non-super assets versus super assets, of course, subject to the balances and stuff that people would ordinarily have.
Yeah, and we also then had that question about the debate of reversionary versus non-reversionary pension, which is linked implicitly to that conversation about the tax rates, because we talk about all of this from also an estate planning point of view, and what it means is to, if your money is better in the super environment or out of the super environment, well, from an estate planning point of view, it may also be better sitting on the outside. And so, there's going to be that break even point, which is going to be different for everybody. And I think, it's a key issue for people to continue to review, to work out what's best. And as I said, no two cases are going to be the same. So, it's about having the appropriate tools around you to understand the ramifications of money in or money out. And to draw one further sort of expansion on that was the question or the comment about preservation within the session, where we talked about preservation age to 67. What we were referencing there was that there's a different planning process for somebody between preservation age, which is 60, and age 67, which is age pension age, where you aren't entitled to additional senior tax offsets that the government provide that are applicable after age 67. And so, you've got these two distinct planning periods that you need to contemplate, on top of the fact that you can now contribute beyond age 67. So it just creates this huge strategic planning dynamic from age 60 right through to 75, as to where is your money best suited.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we could keep talking for a long, long time here. And I guess, to everyone that attended and contributed, a big thank you. It was a topic that was a little different to what we've done in previous years, but certainly recognizing how much is going on in the industry, that we just thought it was an ideal opportunity to kind of just set the scene and sort of show and share our views in where we see the industry right now and where we see issues sort of moving as we go through to 2024. Of course, we have our upcoming SMSF Day events between the 13th to the 27th of March. All of these topics that we touched on and really just scraped the surface of today will be going into much more detail around the estate planning, succession issues, the Division 296 and the impact and the discussions you should be having with your clients. And of course, the non-arm's length income issues, both at an expenditure level, but also around different assets and what the Commissioner's views are on that front as well. So, Tim, thanks again. Look forward to
worries, Aaron. And of course, let me get one little sneaky plug in again for that SMSF Day, because one of the questions today was, are we going to dig deep into reversionary versus non-reversionary? I think if we're going to ever come to fisticuffs, that could be the moment, because that could just be one of the highlights of the day. So it was raised today, and it will most definitely be raised around the country. So it's great to join you again today, and I look forward to speaking next week.
Excellent. Well, the winner will have to buy the other one a beer.
It's on. I'll tell you what I like later.
Yeah, no worries. All right. Cheers. Thanks, everyone. Have a great week. Bye. For now.